50 years ago this month, as you all know, Boston native, well, you don't know about her, but you know about what happened. Native Leola Hampton was one of the 18,000 kids bused around the city, part of a court-mandated effort towards school desegregation. Leola's story, with that of her sister, along with that of her sister Linda and her daughter Maya, who will join us in a second, is part of a new terrific documentary from the GBH newsroom. It's called Never Cried: Boston's Busing Legacy. Here's just some of the sound of her from that documentary.
Sometimes when I go to sleep at night and I close my eyes, I can just envision it. Coming up the hill, getting out, going inside. Me and my sister never talked about it. I never said, Leo, how do you feel? And she never asked me how I felt about it. We just moved on with our lives until now.
That's the voice of Linda, as I said, Leola's sister. GBH is partnering with the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative on 3 events Saturday, that's tomorrow, marking the 50th anniversary of busing in Boston at the BPL's, Boston Public Library's Rab Hall. You go to bostondesegregation.org/events. Leola will talk about it a little bit more in a minute too. Learn more and register for free. If you want to watch the documentary, GBH's documentary, and you should, you can find it on the GBH YouTube channel. We're joined now by Leola Hampton alongside her daughter, Maya Scott. Welcome to you both. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Our pleasure.
Hello, Leola and Maya. Let me just say, first of all, I watched the documentary, and you know I felt it. When you, in particular, though, when you said, almost with the same sort of sense of wonderment that a 14-year-old might have feeling this, I was truly hated. You said, I was truly hated. Mm-hmm. And all I could think about was the number of times that you're initially traumatized, then you're re-traumatized by thinking about it, all the reasons why you push it aside. Mm-hmm. Why did you choose to be part of this documentary?
I thought
and not push it aside, so to have it come to the fore.
Exactly. I thought it was extremely important to tell the story of those 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds. You know, I could always just take my trauma and find a resting place, but our story deserves to be told. Someone needs to understand, to be that young and to deal with that level of violence and hate. You get to this place where you're thrust into adulthood. There's this thing called adultification that happens to black children when they are put into situations that mainly adults should be able to handle. But you're in this situation, it changes you forever. My goal is to make sure that this story is told so that no other child ever will have to go through a situation like that.
Leola, why a variation on Andrea's question? Your sister, we just heard her say, the two of you who experienced together didn't talk about it for 50 years. Why did you decide now was the time to do this?
Well, my sister actually, she went into education. She taught for 35 years.
In the same school system that brought us busing.
And the interesting part is that she was in the 11th grade, I was in the 9th grade. 2 years makes a huge difference as far as maturity is concerned. I internalized things in a way whereas she was able to, with a little bit more of adulting, can understand some things that were happening. So we both thought that as we move forward, and she's always very interested in the development of children, this is the story that needs to be told because we're still in a situation in this country where books are being banned and the story of African American people are being left behind. And I think when that happens, we continue the process of segregation and racism. Those children that are learning right now will grow up to be policymakers and won't have any information as to what other people contributed to this country.
But you had information, Maya, and your source is standing right there to your left. What'd your mother tell you about what she and her sister and thousands of others experienced when you were growing up?
Younger, like when we were younger, it was just a lot of like us knowing that that wasn't an area she liked to go to, like, and we knew like basically.
You mean South Boston?
Exactly.
Yeah.
We knew basically why she didn't want to go, that it was a terrible experience. But I think the older we got, the more bits and pieces we got of the story, and then you kind of get more information. But I used to go to South Boston to play basketball games and stuff like that, and so it was just very interesting to be in that environment years later, and it be very different, but also have this like air of what happened.
Leola, there's the way sort of the individual trauma is dealt with, as you've explained it, the way you and your sister dealt with it, but there's the sort of larger historical of how we deal with it as a race. And we're expected to get over it every time an unarmed black man is shot by the police or someone else. We talk about it in the moment, and then we get over it, and then we find ourselves talking about it again because it's going to happen again, in part because we got over it the first time. Can you talk a little bit about what you hope this documentary and you speaking out does for the more historical aspects of not getting over it and demanding that your history be paid attention to?
Right. And like you said, you think you get over it. You kind of
you
put it
don't.
in a little compartment and say, okay, I've watched generations before me do that. So that is that learned behavior. But for me, like you said, generations later, the ability to have resources, that means that you're cared for. And I think in telling this story, children that deal with not just racism, but just as the group that was here earlier, disabilities, that people will begin to have empathy and understanding, because when you're not exposed to the diversity of our world, you live in this contained box and you kind of shun them away, and you live your life assuming and thinking that the stereotypes of what these people are all about. And my goal is to, expose that.
You say so many things in this film that are incredible. Even when you talk about, I think you're going for a physical because you're on your way to college after high school, and the doctor says you have high blood pressure. And you say, I have high blood pressure,
Yeah.
and you're grinding your teeth, and now we know why. You go to Tennessee, you go to California, you go to Georgia, and your line, which is a showstopper, you learn you can't outrun racism.
Right.
And when you went to those places, when you tried to get away from it in this place in Boston, what was that like? What was that like?
Well, it goes back to my parents. My mother, who was born and raised in the Jim Crow South, she thought she could outrun that, and we ran right into it here in Boston. But for me, the trauma was so great. I just remember, if I could just get out of Boston, I could,
You went back south.
right.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So, and that's the key. You can't outrun it. And it's because as a nation, we've never really addressed it. We've never had the hard conversations to say, you can't talk about 1974 without going back to, 1950, 18, the Emancipation Proclamation. You got to talk about black codes and things like that set the tone for a lot of the things that we experience today.
Well, in Boston, one of the professors who's quoted in this thing says, and I'm paraphrasing, we in Boston like to talk about how horrible it was in Little Rock or some faraway place so we can deflect the discussion away from what happened right in our hometown that still obviously isn't fixed. Have you lived your life differently because of what your mother and your aunt went through?
I would say yes, but probably not very consciously.
Well, how about there's a kid in this film who happens to be yours,
Yes.
who steals the show, little Tyson.
Yeah.
What's his schooling situation going to be? And is it in any way a function of what
Absolutely.
happened 50 years? Well, tell us.
So Tyson goes to Page Academy, and it's this school that was started 60 years ago by this black couple. And a lot of their principals are surrounded by like Kwanzaa principals, unity, like self-love, all of that. And a lot of the instructors or the teachers there are Black or of color. And it was very important for me to put him in an environment, especially that young, where he can see people who looks like him. Like his teacher is a Black male, and there's so many people who go their entire life without having a teacher that's a Black male. So for him to start that way, I'm like really excited. Hopefully I can give him a great foundation. And I haven't really decided like BPS, like I don't really believe in private school. So it's like, it's a very interesting thing to navigate. But hopefully.
He's 3, right?
He's 3.
3, right.
Yeah. My mom has made it better.
Yeah, I just remind Maya that, public schools are what you put into them. And
And what we
what
pay for.
happened back in 1974 was a result of Ruth Babson taking a look at the school system and how deplorable it was and how egregious the Boston School Committee was in their efforts to say, these children are devalued, these children we don't care about, so we will take these funds and we will put them elsewhere. And, I'm here to say, you tried to deny me, but you were not successful. Of course, I don't have like a ton of different acclimates, but my success is not predicated on anyone else's terms.
And how much of that do you think when they were trying to, I might be wrong about this. I grew up in, I didn't grow up here. I grew up in East Providence, Rhode Island. As I learned about Arthur Garrity's decision, what he was trying to do, my feeling about it was that he was well-intentioned but uninformed, and that they were confusing the deserved resources with proximity to white students. Like that idea that what you want to do is be next to white people versus I would just like to have a decent education. Could we?
Right.
When you look back on all of that, you were not the target, but you suffered through a decision that you probably saw differently as a young person. How do you see it now as a grown-up?
I definitely see it different. There were viable options that were presented. Mel King said that all you have to do is put the resources in these schools. That's all they had to do. But I don't think they cared about poor white people or Black people.
Right.
So a decision was made, just a careless decision. The Boston Public School Committee was sued. They were found guilty. So there was a rush to correct what they did. And as a result, me and those thousands of other students were in the fallout, as well as, the children from the town of South Boston. They dropped out of school because, there was a successful campaign by Louise Day Hicks to paint us in this negative.
Right.
But it wasn't just her. That started long time ago with, the Dred Scott case and every other effort to discredit the humanity of Black people. And unfortunately, in South Boston, they believed it.
But
And
they don't talk about how bad, how they weren't well off either after.
Exactly.
You know what I'm
They
saying?
suffered
Like,
greatly.
Right.
People
They suffered
left
greatly.
school, couldn't afford private schools. People were on
Yeah.
drugs. People, like we speak about, Black people and how we suffered through it, but they suffered through it as well because at the root of it, it's about money.
It's about
Always.
money. And what we've learned is that we have to have empathy for each other.
And people with money keeping the people who don't have it fighting amongst themselves so they get to
Exactly.
keep that money.
Convoluting the issue.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's how the
their
Klan
children-
was born. The Klan was born. Poor white people and newly emancipated Blacks had more in common than rich people and white people, but the Klan worked because you could set them against one another, and it worked, and it still works.
It just still works.
Leola, amidst all the violence and hate in this film and in this history, you tell a story near the end of the film about how no one makes better lasagna than you do. Can you explain why you were a lasagna expert, if you would share that with people?
Yeah. In the midst of all of that chaos and violence, we had a home economics teacher who, as I write in my story, she just saw us as to what we were, children. And she took us and we had conversations. She was Italian, so she taught us how to make lasagna, spumoni, I even made marmalade. I'm like, what is that? But that's what education should be, an exposure to the things that you aren't aware of. So, what I want in education is to expose kids to our culture, to collard greens and black-eyed peas, and also lasagna. And that's what humanity is all about.
Is her lasagna as good as she says it is, or is she bragging?
It's really good. She loves anything with red sauce.
I do.
It gives me heart.
I believe there's a small Italian woman inside.
Maya, there's an absolutely precious scene in the film. You're sitting with Tyson, and you're doing the he's finding where his he knows where everything is, but he's pointing it out to you. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, that little boy embodies, all of her hope. What are you going to tell him about his grandmother's experience, and how are you going to let that inform him as he gets his education?
Specifics, I probably will give him as much as he asks for as we move through and he learns more.
And I'll give him the rest when he goes older enough to handle it.
I'm sure you will.
Can you repeat the last question?
And how are you going to let it inform the kind of education he gets?
So I'm really big. My dad would say all the time, like, if you want to learn, you can learn anywhere. And just making sure that Tyson is interested in learning and being a sponge. I think that it's not going to be about where I put him. It's going to be about his mindset, about what he wants for himself. So just making sure that Tyson has a strong foundation in learning and knowing that he's smart and knowing that he's capable. I think a lot of kids come up and that part of them has been broken, especially kids of color. You're told that you're not smart or you're not being able to get this or, and people want to move at a speed that maybe you're not ready for. And just really supporting him at home and understanding what he needs, and if he needs help, being able to be in a position to provide him that. And thankfully having parents like Leola and Ricky Scott that have put me in a position where I'm able to provide for him and give him those resources that some people aren't able to provide.
Leola, could you tell us what, I mentioned in the introduction that tomorrow this Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative is sponsoring 3 events. Could you give us a sense of what's going to happen, and then Andrea will give the website again.
Okay, so there'll be this forum tomorrow. There'll be 2 separate programs. I'm in the first program, and basically we are really taking a deep dive into the legacy of desegregation, its successes and its failures. And we're going to hear from so many different levels. I will be speaking from a student's perspective. There will be Ira, who was the chief of staff to the mayor at that time. And you will have teachers. You will have politicians, the lawyers that were involved in the lawsuit. So everyone will get the opportunity to really get a clear understanding of what happened and what was the fallout and where are we going forward from this place.
Great.
Right.
It's wonderful to meet you both. The film is really important and spectacular. Thanks for your time
Thank
today.
you both.
Can
It was a pleasure.
Can I just add that me and my sister, what we're doing moving forward is, she's created this, it's called Subi's World. And I've actually, going to surprise her, I've finished the children's book, which is about 2 sisters that are dealing or faced with adversity, and they go into this place called Subi's World where they get to see and understand that differences are actually beautiful.
When's the book happening?
Good job, Mom.
I'm just about done.
So you'll come back
Yeah,
when the book's
please.
published. We'd love to talk to you about it.
Oh, okay.
That's
Please
fabulous.
do. Yeah, so 2 books I'm working on.
And say hi to your sister, too.
I sure
It's
will.
really-
I sure
she's
will.
really
Thank you
something.
both for being
Good
here.
to meet you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.